Chief Justice John Roberts entered that hearing, thinking there was nothing left to surprise him, until Jasmine Crockett turned his earlier remarks back on him and left the room in stunned silence. There was a pause in room 2141 of the Rayburn House. Office building, but not the kind that soothes. It was the kind you feel right before tension snaps through the air on the agenda. It seemed like just another session, but something in that room felt different. You could tell something was coming. Chief Justice Roberts sat at the table, wearing a navy suit that probably cost more than most people there earn in a month. He appeared, calm, measured, and some might say overly confident. This was far from his first appearance. He had testified before Congress more than once, and he understood how the system worked. Speak just enough, stay in control, remain above the noise. But this time, the situation was not so routine. This was not about sweeping legal concepts. This was about something that even veteran judges struggle with, judicial ethics. There had been a growing public outcry, concerns about bias, about undisclosed gifts and personal ties that never seemed to make it into official filings. People were watching, cameras were rolling, and this time the robe offered no protection. Committee members took their turns. Some asked easy questions. Others walked a fine line, avoiding both aggression and weakness. Then her name was called, and there was a noticeable shift. Representative Jasmine Crockett of Texas. She leaned into the mic, her voice low, but clear enough to grab attention. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Some in the room had tuned out. They had heard of Hera, former public defender, newer to the chamber, known for her sharp remarks during debates and for saying things plainly. But this was a different stage, and she was seated across from the top judicial figure in the nation. You could almost sense people wondering how long she could stay in control. Justice Roberts kept his posture. He gave her the kind of polite smile only those with long-held power know how to use, a mix of courtesy and calculation, as if humoring a thoughtful question. But Crockett did not come looking for approval. She was there to ask tough questions. Chief Justice, she began, you have stated before that the court abides by a strong standard of ethical behavior, even without a formal code. Is that right? Roberts folded his hand, his voice steady. That is correct. Congresswoman, the court follows long-standing principles that have guided judicial conduct for generations. She nodded, turning a page in her binder. Then help me understand. If that is the case, why was there no mention of the connection between Justice Merritt and a political donor with a case before the court last year? That got people's attention, and cameras clicked. A few heads turned. Roberts did not smile this time. He adjusted his tie, just a little. I cannot speak about active ethical evaluations or cases involving specific justices, right? Crockett replied, glancing down briefly before looking up again. But you are able to speak on precedent, correct? Yes, good, she said. Because as I understand it, and please correct me if I am mistaken, the Supreme Court has traditionally used the idea of perceived misconduct as a guiding rule, that it is not just about whether something breaks rules, but whether the public has cause to believe it might. Roberts shifted in his seat. Many institutions have followed the appearance standard. Yes, Crockett kept going, then would not failing to reveal a close tie with someone who stands to benefit from a court's ruling seem improper? She did not shout, did not raise her tone. She did not need to. The room was already silent. Roberts stayed calm, but the balance had shifted. His answer was more measured. Congresswoman, I think we are now entering theoretical territory. I am referencing documented information from your court's own financial reports, but the most intense moment in the room was still on its way. Roberts sat up straighter in his chair. One hand rested on the polished table. His eyes, calm and experienced, briefly studied Crockett's face, but she did not flinch. Her eyes stayed locked, and her tone stayed steady. I am reading directly from the disclosure records. Chief Justice, she repeated, slower. As if daring him to dispute the facts, she cleared his throat. The records are prepared by the court's administrative team, and I believe the process is handled responsibly. But do you check them yourself? She asked, head tilted slightly. Do you personally ensure what gets filed is accurate and complete? The silence that followed was short but revealing. There is a process in place, he said. Yacht Justice is in charge of their own disclosures. Crockett leaned back in her seat. She did not grin. This was not that kind of moment. Instead, she let the pause speak for her. Interesting, she said, because where I come from, if you monitor your own behavior, you are not being held responsible. You are just grading your own testa. Few people in the gallery exchanged looks. One aide let out a soft breath, half chuckle, half disbelief. Roberts tried to refocus with respect. Congresswoman, the judicial branch was built to be independent from both Congress and the White House. Our duty is to interpret the law, not respond to outside political influence. No one here is asking you to do that. Crockett replied, we are not trying to control your decisions. We are asking why the same concerns keep appearing and why nothing changes. Roberts opened his mouth, but she lifted her hand, not to interrupt, but to shape her next point. I spent years in courtrooms across Texas watching judges speak to young men, black, brown, white, it did not matter, about owning up about how even seeming dishonest could destroy their futures. So forgive me if I do not accept that the nation's top court cannot live up to that. Roberts adjusted his seat slightly again. Congresswoman, I hear what you are saying, but I can assure you we take every concern seriously and address them with internal review and professionalism. There is no binding code, Crockett said, and the only review comes from within a pause. That is like letting a fox write a security report about the chicken coop. This time, there was a quiet stir in the back of the room. Camera shutters clicked faster. Journalists leaned in closer. It's not putting on a show. She was backing him in. Roberts breathed in through his nose, his fingers now gripping the table's edge, still composed. But now his replies carried the tone of someone who realized this was more pressure than he expected. The court welcomes critique, he said, but I must remind the Congresswoman that mutual respect between branches matters. Crockett looked down briefly, then back up, a flicker of frustration in her face, not because she was off track, but because she knew the word respect was being used to dodge responsibility. I do respect the court, she said. I respect what it is supposed to stand for, but respect without honesty means nothing, and the voters who sent me here did not elect me to admire your title. They sent me to find out why the rules seem to shift depending on who wears the robe. Roberts looked at her longer now. The change was slight but real. He was no longer seeing a first-term lawmaker. He was seeing someone ready to challenge every technical barrier he offered. But she was not finished yet. What came next was not theory. It came with evidence. The next documents in Jasmine Crockett's folder were thin. Just a few clipped sheets, but they carried weight, not the loud kind, but the kind that makes people stop. She slid one page forward on the desk and leaned into the microphone. Chief Justice, are you familiar with Dalton v. Mason County, decided by the Fifth Circuit in 2009? Roberts narrowed his eyes for a moment, not out of confusion, but calculation. Slightly, that was a procedural matter about judicial recusal, if I recall. You do not, Crockett answered. It dealt with a judge who failed to step aside despite having indirect financial links to a law firm involved in the case. The court said that even the appearance of bias was enough to require recusal. She tapped the corner of the paper, and yet, just last year, Justice Harlan sat on Macon v. Delta Rayla case, where a longtime friend and donor of his stood to benefit greatly from the outcome. Roberts said nothing right away. Crockett leaned in slightly. No recusal, no reason given, no clarity, and the ruling came down 5-4. This was not just criticism. It was a precise cut into the court's fragile defense. Roberts let out a slow breath. Congresswoman, I am not here to debate specific rulings. I am not asking you to, she replied. I am asking how a court built on the idea of fairness expects Americans to keep believing when its decisions feel more like secret deals than fair and balanced rulings. A few quiet gasps, soft but genuine. A staffer's pen slipped and hit the ground. Roberts leaned closer to the microphone. Your tone is charged, and your silence, Crockett responded calmly, has done more harm. She did not hurry each sentence, given room to land there. Is a woman named Carla Jennings in my district, a single mom. Worked hospital night shifts for 20 years. Her son was denied aid for college over a small error in paperwork. It looked like she owed taxes. She fought the decision all the way only to be told, basically, too bad. She paused, eyes on Roberts, but a billionaire, connected to a sitting justice, gets a case heard, argued and decided in under 4 months, with a ruling that helps him. Roberts's eyes tightened just slightly. His fingers now folded tighter than before, he had not expected. This kind of preparation, especially not from her. The court, he said, has limited capacity and must be selective about which cases it accepts. That does not show bias. But what about how it looks? She asked. He stayed quiet. She asked again. Chief Justice does. Perception matter. He gave a small nod. Of course, Crockett's tone dropped slightly. Then I suggest you pay closer attention to what people are seeing, because right now, they are not seeing justice. They are seeing the system defending itself for the first time. Roberts had no reply. The room stayed silent. The chair did not interrupt. No one wanted to cut in. What was happening now felt significant, and Crockett, she was not raising her voice. She turned another page. I came with respect, but I also came with facts, and the facts show your institution has an issue, a serious one, and it is time to stop pretending otherwise. But the real turning point was still coming. Not until the Chief Justice understood exactly who he was facing. The change in his voice was noticed by everyone. He leaned in a bit, hands clasped as if steadying himself. But his voice was no longer as calm, more uncertain now. Congresswoman, he said, while I respect your concern, I would advise against forming views based on single cases without knowing the full legal context. Crockett did not blink. With respect, Chief Justice, I am not forming opinions. I am connecting the dots. There is a difference, and she could feel it now. The shift in the room. No one was focused on Roberts anymore. All eyes were on her, and she made her next move. In 2013, she said, lifting another sheet, you spoke at Harvard Law's graduation. You told them, and I quote, credibility is your currency. You said if people stop trusting your integrity, everything else falls apart. Roberts leaned back slightly. That is right, then. Tell me, she said, voice tighter now. How does credibility survive when trust in your court is lower than it has been in years? When polls show most Americans believe the court is guided more by politics than by law. He did not answer quickly, so she continued. You do not get to build a reputation for 20 years, then act surprised when your silence about your peers starts tearing it apart. Roberts started to speak, but Crockett did not pause this time. You call it passion. It is not. It is accuracy. I am not shouting. I am not guessing. I am asking why people, like Carla Jennings, are held to rules your justices ignore right out. The open, she adjusted her tone. Lower, stronger. Do you know what it feels like to step into a courtroom, already knowing the outcome is not in your favor? I have seen young men break down after sentencing because they knew they never really had a chance. Because justice was not based on truth, it was based on excess, on connections, on availability. The silence in the room became heavier. No pens clicking, no murmurs. Just Crockett's voice, each word hitting like glass breaking. Roberts tried to step in. The court has made changes. She cut in. Not enough, not when billionaires take justices to private resorts. And nobody questions it, not when rulings that affect millions are made behind doors no one can open. And then she said it. You were right about one thing. Credibility is currency. And right now your court is overdrawn. That line landed harder than anything she had said all morning. A clerk in the back wrote it so fast the pen nearly ripped through the paper for the first time. Roberts had nothing to come back with. He just sat there. Crockett let the pause sit for 2 full moments, then leaned back in her chair, letting everything she said linger. This was not for show. This was not a performance. This was someone finally saying what others would not. Calling out a court that had grown distant, exclusive, untouchable. Roberts straightened his tie again, but it looked more like habit than confidence. The chair of the committee cleared his throat, ready to move forward. But even, he waited, maybe out of respect, maybe because he had no idea what could follow that. But Crockett was not done yet, not until regular Americans were part of this moment. Too, she was not here to trade arguments with a Supreme Court justice. She was aiming higher toward something personal for those watching at home, the ones who did not know legal case names, but lived with their impact every day. She took a breath and changed her tone, slower now, steadier, less like a courtroom, more like a conversation. There is a man in Odessa, she said, named Jorge Salgado, a truck driver, worked straight through the pandemic, never complained, never took a break, but when his brother was locked up in a private immigration center and denied medical care, he filed a petition. The court dismissed it without reviewing the details. She glanced at Robert. She could not understand why, so I explained to him. The law was written that way, and the system makes it nearly impossible to challenge injustice when the language protects those with power. She leaned in, and the highest court had a chance to step in, but you all chose not to. No reasons given. No explanation, nothing at all. Roberts remained silent. Crockett went on, these are not made-up stories. Chief Justice, these are real people who still believe in the law even after it lets them down. People who believe that if they do everything right, someone up high will listen. She turned to face the room. Not just Roberts, and we all have to ask ourselves, what happens when they stop believing, when they stop thinking fairness is even possible? For those without a company, without campaign, money, without boardroom. Her voice had a raw edge, not rage. Not a show, just honesty. She paused briefly before going on. I became a lawyer because I believed the law could be used for fairness. I stayed in law because I learned it is only as fair as those who enforce it. And today, I am sitting across from someone with more influence than most will ever know, but who will not admit that power can go unchecked. Roberts finally replied, but his voice had lost its strength. Congresswoman, I understand some rulings have harsh effects, but the court's job is not to rescue people. It is to apply the law as written. Crockett gave a nod. And what if the law is written for the benefit of a few? What if it is used in ways that keep the powerful on top? She did not wait for his reply. She already knew he would not give one. You speak of judicial independence, she said. But independence without responsibility is not strength, it is disconnection. Someone whispered in the back, she is right. Not for fact, just one voice saying what others thought. Crockett flipped one more sheet. This is not just political. It is about principle, about showing people like Jorge and Carla that their lives are not unseen, that their stories do not stop mattering. Just, because they leave your courtroom. She looked around again because the truth is, if this court refuses to check itself, then it falls on the people, through us, to ask stronger and sharper questions. The camera focused on Roberts's face, his lips pressed, in a flat linen smile. No cover, just quiet. She looked at him again. I did not come here to shame you. I came here to remind you. Justice is not about position. It is not about history. It is about people who still believe that somewhere, someone in authority actually cares, but she had not come all this way just to talk. She had one last thing to say, and it was going to stay with them for a few long seconds. No one said a word. The silence made space for itself and stayed. Reporters stopped typing, staffers gave up pretending to organize papers. Even committee members, some of whom had barely looked up before, now sat still, all eyes on Crockett. Something had shifted. Roberts felt it too. His back stayed straight, but the edge had faded. His usual approach. Calm voice, legal terms. Careful distance did not work this time, not with her. Crockett slowly shut her folder and rested her hands on the desk. Her voice, when she spoke again, was low and thoughtful. You know, growing up in St. Louis, there was this old judge, white guy, former military, tough as stone, but he used to say something that stuck with me. A courtroom is only as honest as the people bold enough to question it. He looked at Roberts again. I think about that a lot now. There was no applause, no drama, just weight like her words had marked the space. Roberts shifted in his chair but still said nothing. His confidence had not disappeared. It had just finally been met by someone who did not treat it as untouchable. Across the room, Representative Leonard Franks, a veteran from Arizona, who rarely spoke during these sessions, leaned into his mic and muttered, "Damn, it was not about laws or arguments. It was about respect." And Crockett showed no reaction. She had not come for compliments. Chairman Bledsoe finally spoke, his voice slower than usual. The committee thanks Representative Crockett for her question. Even he seemed careful, as if moving on too quickly might disturb something that needed to settle. Roberts reached for his glass of water. His hand shook, barely enough to notice, but Crockett saw it. She looked straight at him. You do not have to agree with me, Chief Justice, but you heard me. That is all I wanted. Her voice carried no hostility, no pride, just something harder to ignore. Truth, spoken plainly, one by one. Others resumed their questions, but the energy had shifted. The tone had changed. Questions were sharper now, more direct. No one wanted to follow her, but they had to. and no one wanted it to seem like they were trying to undo what she had just done. Even Roberts answered differently no. His responses were shorter, more focused, his voice clipped, his usual charm set aside. He was not defensive, but he was alert outside the hearing room. It was already catching fire. Online clips from Crockett's exchange were spreading fast. People who never cared about court hearings were now watching an entire segment on their lunch break in a cafe near Capitol Hill. Barista paused, mid-order to replay one of Crockett's lines in a Dallas classroom. A young black girl turned to her teacher and asked, "Is she a lawyer?" And across homes, around the country, people who had given up on the system felt something they had not felt in years. Representation without compromise. Inside room 214B1, Roberts looked at Crockett once again, just briefly. But this time it was not with superiority, it was with understanding. Not of defeat, but of awareness. She was not just a rising name, not someone coming up. She was the moment. But even as the hearing seemed to settle, there was still one more thing she had to say. Because this was not just about rules or panels. This was about what would be remembered. The room was back to its usual pace, on the surface at least. But anyone paying attention knew it felt different. What started as a typical scripted hearing was now shaped, defined. Even by a moment you could not skip silence or walk over. Jasmine Crockett had finished speaking, but her presence had not faded. Her words were still in the room. Like a law yet to be written, she had done more than question a Supreme Court justice. She made the entire system pause as the hearing went on, and other representatives took their turns. Crockett sat quietly, listening. No reactions, no whispers, just focus. She understood what had happened. There was no need to repeat it. About 30 minutes later, as the questioning finished, Chairman Bledsoe called for a short break. Members stretched. Staff stood up. A few reporters hurried out to send their reports. Roberts stood too, but before turning away from the table, he glanced back. Crockett stayed still. "Congresswoman," he said, voice slightly softer. "Your district is lucky to have you." She looked up. "I know," he nodded. Not formal, not stiff, just real, and turned to leave. He did not look rattled anymore, just quieter as the room cleared. A young woman from the gallery, a law student from Missouri, wearing a blazer a bit too large, approached Crockett slowly. "I just wanted to say," she started, "I never thought anyone ever spoke to them like that. Not for real." Crockett stood, fixing her sleeve. "Spoke to them like what?" she asked. "Like they are not above you," the student replied. Crockett smiled. "Not big, not planned, just enough. They are not, that was all." She gathered her notes and walked out of the hearing room without saying another word. Later that night, the moment reached national television, not just the political programs but evening news. It was not the clash that caught people's attention. It was the calm, the control. Like Crockett had not just made a point, she had led a lesson. Analysts tried to shape it. Some said it challenged the old system, others said it was just a performance. But those who watched all of it, the ones who listened instead of reacting, felt something different. Clarity. For years, the public was told the Supreme Court was off limits, untouchable. But Crockett showed, plainly and legally, that even sacred things can be questioned. That power without limits is not stability, it is decline. And maybe, just maybe, a little discomfort in that courtroom was exactly what justice required. Because the truth is, real change does not always arrive loud with signs and chants. Sometimes it comes in quietly with a single voice, a voice that stays steady even when challenged by the powerful. And if someone like Jasmine Crockett can sit across from the Chief Justice of the United States and speak honestly, then maybe, just maybe, others can do the same where they are in their towns, at their work, in their homes. That is what moments like this do. They do not only belong to the people who were present, they belong to all of us. If this story spoke to you, hit that subscribe button, because there is more to come. And we are only getting started.